Apart from placing in images as layers, you can also create empty new layers in Photoshop by using either this little icon here at the bottom of the layers panel, which will create the new layer, or you can use the shortcut Command or Control Shift N, which will come up with this dialog box where you can type in the name of that new layer. Let's just say I'm going to call this Markup or Markups, and I click OK. That will create that empty new layer here in the layers panel. Then if I switch to the brush tool, I can start painting on this empty new layer. So let's say I just want to have an arrow pointing at this image on this point here. Then I would like to have another arrow pointing at the couple. So I'm just going to paint this over with the brush tool like that. And both of these arrows will be in that layer, which I can turn on and off, or even use the move tool to move them around. So whenever you want to create something from scratch, you can use an empty layer in Photoshop. And whenever you decide that you don't need a layer anymore, you can delete it as well, just as easily as you created it. So all you need to do is to click on the trash icon here at the bottom, or press backspace on the keyboard. So that will delete the currently selected layer. But let me undo this last step. So I go to Edit, Undo, or you can press Command or Control Z, which will bring this layer back. Now, another very useful thing to learn is that you can control the opacity of layers. Each layer has an individual opacity setting. So I have a Markups layer selected, and I can reduce the opacity here in the layers panel. And notice what happens. The arrows will become transparent, and after a while they will completely disappear if I drag opacity down to 0%. Now, you can also change the opacity even faster by click and dragging on the word opacity. So just click on that and start dragging left and right. Or you can also use the numbers on the keyboard, as long as you have the move tool selected, or any tool that doesn't have its own opacity. But it's good to get used to using the move tool for this. So if you have the move tool selected and you have a layer selected, let's say in this case the panorama layer, I can press 5 on my keyboard to immediately turn it to 50% opacity. If I press 1, that will go down to 10%. 8 would be 80%. If I press 6 and 5, for example, quickly one after the other, it will be 65. For 1%, I can press 0, 1. And for 100% again, I can press 0. 0, 0 would be 0% completely. But instead of using that, you can just use the eye icon if you want to hide something completely. So you don't have to use the opacity for that. And there is also another very useful feature called Fill Opacity, which you can use in case you have layer styles in your document, which I actually have on these images here. And this is something I'm going to explain in the next video. But for now, I just would like to show you that if a layer has effects, or it's called layer styles, like this stroke and drop shadow on this layer, which I can turn off to see it without that, or turn it back on. If I reduce fill opacity instead of opacity, that can reduce the opacity or visibility of the image without affecting the effects on the layer. So the layer styles can stay intact, and only the image's opacity is going to change. So that's what fill opacity is for. Another very useful feature is called lock transparency. That can be used on normal layers like this one, Markups, which has the arrows on it. If I turn off all my other layers, you can see everything around them is transparent. And if I would continue painting, let's say in this case with another color like black, I can do that quickly by switching to black to make that my foreground color. So if I would start painting, you will see that the paint can go anywhere in the document, not just on top of the arrows that I already have. But if I undo this last step and I turn on the lock transparency option, which will lock transparent pixels within this layer, then when I start painting, notice that I can change quickly the color, for example, of that arrow by painting over it. Okay, so it keeps all the transparent pixels locked. which is a very useful option. So it's a special way of locking the layer. Only the transparent pixels will be locked. So it only allows you to make changes to the already filled details within the layer. And the same way we turn this on, we can also turn it off. And once I do that, I can start again drawing anywhere within the layer. So let me just turn back my other layers. And let me show you also a couple of settings for the layers panel. If you right click on any of the thumbnails, you can see that we have these options here, like clip thumbnails to layer bounds or document bounds. I prefer to use layer bounds, but by default you will see something more like this. The document bounds option is the default setting in Photoshop, which means that every thumbnail will show the whole canvas, and it will show you within the canvas where that current layer is located. But you can also increase and decrease the size of the thumbnails. So let me just make it large so we can see it better. Now you can see exactly what the thumbnails show in case you have the document bounds option on. But if you switch to layer bounds, then you will see only the layer content within the thumbnails, which I prefer because that way I can see even these arrows much clearer than if I have it in document bounds. So I normally use clip thumbnails to layer bounds, and I normally use small thumbnails just so I can fit multiple layers in my layers panel and I can see them all together. You can also create layer groups, which is another very useful option. So if I were to select multiple layers by Control, Command, or Shift clicking to add to your selection, in this case I selected these 3 images, then I can go to Layer and choose Group Layers, or you can also remember the shortcut Command or Control G. Once you do that, it will put all those 3 layers into a layer group, which makes it easier to just select that group and use the move tool to move them around. So in case you want to always move them together or interact with them together, then you can place them in a group. But of course, this group can be renamed as well. So I can call this images, and I can also click on the little arrow to open the group and see what's inside it. So if I want, I can still select these layers individually, but whenever I select the group itself, I can move them also together very quickly. I can even change the opacity of the whole group together. So not individually changing the layer opacity, but changing the whole layer group's opacity. You can also move layers out of a layer group. As you can see now, I only have the other 2 within the group, but the same way I can also drag and drop layers into a group. And if I don't need a layer group anymore, I can just select it, and then from the layer menu I can find ungroup layers, or Control or Command Shift G is the shortcut for that, which will remove the layer group and put the layers back normally as they were in the layer structure. You can even have groups within groups, and layer groups are great for organizing your work. And I'm going to use them in other videos as well, so you will see exactly how they work. Now, last but not least, in this video, I would like to also show you that you can merge layers together. So for example, if I select a couple of layers here together, I can then either right click on them and choose merge layers, or I can go to the layers panel menu and choose merge layers from there. You can also choose this from the layer menu here on the top. You will find merge layers, and notice that there is also a shortcut Command or Control E. Once you do that, the selected layers will be merged together, which means you won't be able to move these apart anymore because they completely are merged. So they became one layer and you lost the flexibility of being able to move them around and changing things easily. The only advantage of merging layers is that the file size will be smaller and it will be faster to work with the document, but I would recommend not to do this. So very rarely do I merge layers together. I prefer to keep everything separate in order to be able to make changes easily. I just go back using the step backward until I get all the layers back. And once again, although I don't recommend to do it, but it's also possible to merge all the layers together, which is called flatten layers. You will also find that from the layer menu, and there's flatten image. So that will automatically merge everything together, and now it will be flattened into the background layer. So once again, that means I can't move things around anymore. Everything is merged into one layer. So this is something you should avoid. Instead, save a Photoshop file with all your layers or a TIFF, and save a separate JPEG file, which will automatically merge and flatten all the layers anyway. Or you can use PNG file format, which will do exactly the same. And although we covered quite a lot now about layers, it's still not enough, because we have to talk about special layers, and that's exactly what I'm going to talk about in the next video.